Without further ado, I would like to go to the point. The Latin America and the Caribbean, with more than 170 million populations, is based on has growth. The population, 80% urban, demands water, energy, and consumption goods. This population continues growing, and the demand will continue to grow. This is the most unequal population of the world. A third of the population that is poor, and almost half of the territory that is degraded for many reasons, for industry, mine, energy production, food production that have not considered environmental criteria, and also for the consumption patterns and the vision of maximizing income without thinking with social and environmental issues. We cannot continue doing the same, because the delay in actions lowers the rights and the freedom of those who are about to be born in the region. We have everything to shift this paradigm. We have the human, natural, and economic capital. We have heard the 30% of water resources, 23 of forests, all the biomasses are in this region. We are the center of thousands of plants that are used all around the world, and we have cultural diversity, 40 million indigenous people speaking 350 languages and know the appropriate use of land. We are the most biodiverse land. We've seen this for many decades, and we have seen say that here. But we are not basing our own development on these opportunities. The region should become a world leader and have joint positions to increase the environmental ambitions, but specifically biodiversity. We can be an example of nature-based solutions. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands in during millennia, and contributed by science and organizations of civil society working jointly with communities that are not becoming public policies and are very successful experiences that should not be hindered. We also have institutions and organizations that are ambitious, the human and scientific skills in our regions that are of high level, but we are not able to be on the right path of sustainability, and we continue depending on the North to find solutions and even to be rescued with generated scientific documents have been generated, and we are not using them. We have much more than we are using. I want to mention three obstacles of why this is happening. We know that biodiversity is important, but we want to have a culture of respect, especially in the human population, urban population that sees it from very far. We're recognizing the dependency on the well-being of having a healthy nature. Without well-being, there are no possibilities of having a appropriate development, but this well-being will not be achieved if we don't have a nature that works correctly. Even this sounds something that has been seen is something that does not happen in public policies. Science and interdisciplinary approaches have shown that interaction between the different processes that provoke global change, loss of biodiversity, climate change, we have to understand them in a joint way. The solutions should be given jointly also, and understand causes and effects. But in that decision-making process, we are very fast. An economy will beat us. We don't have new generation policies that address the compliance of the goals. And when they try to accomplish a goal, they are provoking problems in other goals because the ministries are not planning jointly. I want to mention something that I'm very concerned about. The restoration this decade has given put emphasis on restoration in Latin America. 50 million hectares to be restored, and after trying to achieve a goal, we can provoke great problems if we don't see where and what that technologies were working. A third element of concern is that we have much more information than the one we're using, but we don't have the mechanisms to transfer the scientific knowledge to the public policies. This is a responsibility of scientists, but also of the politicians to find these mechanisms. The pandemic was an important lesson. Science made progress in a very exceptional way, but the politics could not use the opportunity. I want to finish with 3 suggestions to use the advantages of the region and establish common guidelines that include transform financial and productive strategies for food security. In food security strategy, we have to join all environmental, social, and economic processes. There's a lot of information, and we don't have that strategy. If we say ROLAC, FAO organized a high-level debate on food security in a region, it could help a lot to have guidelines that reflect our reality from IPCC experience, which should have around ROLAC a group of expert scientists in the region that can contribute to create the generations and nature-based solutions and suggest the efficient mechanisms to create this interface between science and decision making. And a third topic, we should assume a leadership in the region necessary to defend biodiversity, and maybe this is in COP15 is the opportunity. The beginning of the pandemic, it showed that there was a bad relationship between nature and society, and it was erased because of the economic and social problems. Science decided to affect the reasons. And this topic is not in the speeches. We had a network of protection, we had an exchange of experiences, and thousands of people were trained to face this challenge. We are not talking enough. I hope this network could be recovered and exchange the lessons learned. We have the knowledge, the experiences are there. We don't have time to lose, because this is a matter of social justice for the youth and ethics and respect for all the ways of life that revolution have tried. Thank you, Julia, for your clear messages. We are listening a lot to it, things we have done. So these are opportunities to speed up action. Now I give the floor to Christian Samper, President and CEO of Wildlife Conservation Society, that is here. 5 minutes, it's a little bit, I know. Then later you can go to Christian. Christian, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with Julia, whom I know for a long time. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. I'm a Colombian, a scientific. To tell you a story, I finished my PhD on the 1992 Earth Summit, and I went back to Colombia, and what was happening is we signed those global agreements, and now what? It took a transformation to create the national environmental system, ministries, but something important, we decided to strengthen the scientific capacity, and we created a series of research investigations, marine, land matters, entity designed to be a bridge between science and politics. As Julia said, one of the challenges we have is that in our region we have we have good universities, but the knowledge is not getting in the right form to your desks as ministers to give you the idea. And that's why the did with the inform report from the minister, that is make peace with nature, and I invite you to do this. The institutionality is very important, and something that Julia said is that CONAVI in Mexico is Humboldt in Colombia. Not all the countries have that, but we need to build those capacities. Enrique and I are on a meeting about the Pacific Corridor, and we are looking at one of the great ecosystems, and we need that scientific information to go beyond borders and make us understand what we have and how we can protect it. We always focus on how concerning the moments are. We know all the problems, I won't repeat them. For me, this is the most exciting moment in all my career because we've never had more information and more knowledge on what is happening in the planet as now. We have remote sensors, and we have millions of data that we're not using. So good part of this is to analyze, to summarize that, and make it available to people. This is moment of the great wealth of the biodiversity. Where countries have a wealth, there are a great library, and this is going to be the century of genomics. We're going to transfer human health, the way we produce food. However, we don't have the capacity to have that advantage, to use that library to add value in the region and use it as a key element for development. And that was one of the key recommendations as Carlos, the minister, the President Duca summoned a group of scholars, and he said, give me an agenda for the next 25 years for Colombia. And one of the key topics was biodiversity as key element, and comparative advantage, and economics. And in bioeconomics can include tourism, development of nature tourism, nature-based solutions like the carbon market, genomics. There are a lot of options. And what we need is to have bridges not only between academia and the politicians and the private sectors. We have to research institutes of the agricultural sector or fisheries. We have to have a triangle: science, investigation, and innovation to have comparative advantages. And I end up with something that we proposed at the beginning when I designed the Humboldt Institute. We said there were three big challenges for Colombia: to know, conserve, and use. We have to using all these and raise awareness. That is something key. We have to protect that. We have protected areas, deforestation, all these topics you know about, but that's not enough. We have to use it in a way that creates wealth, and that wealth is created in the nations and different countries So it really becomes a key element of development, and we have to protect not only 30%, 5 or 6 Mesoamerican forests, but also 20 or 30% of the economy of our countries comes from bioeconomics. This is something we can do if we work all together. Thank you, Christian. And also how we give that value added to the treasure we have is part of this thought, not only with conventional mechanisms. Julia said we look up to the north to see to find solutions, but sometimes because we need to be rescued. But from here we can get these visions, and there is a huge potential, so it becomes a development driver. Now we have Enrique Sala. He is explorer in residence from National Geographic, and one of reference in terms of oceans, that other treasure we have in the region. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Is something that is in a bad situation. I will explain for 1 minute what are the problems. The overfishing in all the regions, all the ecosystems of the region, hundreds of species that are being exploited are dropping, and also water heating of the ocean and pollution that comes from the land is destroying complete ecosystems, as coral reefs in the Caribbean that are like a coral cemetery. Also, the way of fishing, also troll fishing brings a lot of incidental fish. Those big nets brings part of the sediment with the carbon it contains, and that creates CO2 emissions that are huge at the global level. Troll fishing generates CO2 emissions just like airplanes. This is a problem that is not in the radar of public policies. In spite of the problems, we are not very clear on what we have to do. There are many actions to improve fishing, but I want to focus on one of the most effective and fastest mechanism to restore marine biodiversity and all the benefits that it offers to humanity. And I want to show you what happens when you protect an area. If you had the problem to dive in an area, this is Cabo Pulmo in Mexico. Local fishermen asked the Mexican government to create a national park in the 90s. You cannot see any fish here. 10 years after that, that desert became this extraordinary recovery of marine life that could only seen in areas that are completely protected, and around the world we see that areas that are protected, those that produce the best benefits. The areas that are protected only on the paper but allow commercial fishing are no different from non-protected areas. Highly protected areas produce a recovery 600% of marine life with all the benefits it creates. Tourism that is huge. Galapagos Island marine tourism generates 35 times more benefits than fishing and employs 8 times more people. Also, those areas that are adult allow areas to grow, regenerate neighboring areas, because big fish create large amount of eggs that together with the spillover creates to republish the areas. One example is Galapagos Islands, where industrial fishing is prohibited. You can see the hotspots where they used to fish tuna, and at the right, tuna fishing is getting the most benefit for the same effort just on the west border of the reserve. It happens around the reserve of Galapagos, not in other area. It also is helping fishing, marine reserves, helps recovery life inside of it and outside. With this is very clear how much ocean protection is the region. When we see a region of all the protected areas on the paper, it seems a lot. For example, Chile has 24% of exclusive economic area protected from fishing. Most of the countries have less than 1% of exclusive economic area highly protected. How much ocean protection is needed? Science is clear. There are hundreds of studies that have seen what amount of ocean should be protected to obtain benefits besides biodiversity, to avoid the collapse of species, to help fisheries, local communities. And the medium was 37% of MAR to obtain multiple benefits for people. Last year, we published a study with international authors to see what are the areas to be protected in the ocean to get preserve biodiversity and all the benefits of humanity, reducing carbon emissions and helping produce more fish than if you were fishing all over the ocean. As we saw, as a minimum 30% of the ocean has to be protected to maximize the benefits for humanity. So science is very clear in the region. This is part of that study. The yellow areas and light green are in the 10% of the top priorities at global level for protection of biodiversity. As you can see, most of the hotspots are at the coastal areas, shallow areas. That is the infra-represented in the region. Coastal areas are the areas where there is less protection over exploitation, where completely protected areas would produce the most economic and social benefits. Science is very clear. The challenge is clear. Science is there, as Christian said. And we just have to apply these exercises in each country so they can protect a percentage that would maximize the benefits for the country and the people of the country in contrary to current situation. Thank you. Thank you, Enrique. Science is very clear. Now we will listen to Donald Rojas, indigenous representative, where it's key that we see all that ancestral knowledge, a biodiverse region with much of that ancestral knowledge. So, Donald. Thank you. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you in the first place. Latin America has 825 indigenous people, more 200 more that have not been reached in different areas. 45 million inhabitants recognized as indigenous people. We represent more than 8% of the population. More than 500 indigenous languages and about 800 million forest hectares that represent 23% of forest at the global level. It's not by chance that in indigenous people there are forests. And this has been achieved because of the indigenous knowledge for many years. When we're asked what are the causes of climate change, we have to look that after conquer and colonization process and structural situations in governance is that has made deforestation possible and racism in many of our areas. These were old forests, and it is completely with serious climate problems because ecosystems have disappeared. So very quickly, I would like to say that we have three elements that are linked, should be balanced. What gives us the knowledge from childhood to get their knowledge. Time gives you the moon, the sun, to know about their movement, to know when to plant a tree or build a house. Nature is where you can see all the standards or scientific concepts and a series of regulations that allow you to use the indigenous knowledge. And on the other side is the human being, where there are spiritual ideas, but also governance, regulations, ethical behavior. We think that the big mistake of today is that I consider the natural resources. We know that nature is the most important things and human beings should be the most important. We've lost that, and that is the consequence of this. The knowledge have allowed modern science to produce medicine, architecture, food designs. If we watch of ceremony centers as Cusco, Machu Picchu, Tikal, maybe in Mexico, today's societies don't have this. We have lost those things. We should go back to that knowledge and combine it to have a resilient and sustainable society. Something key, the seeds, is something that we kept even though we've lost about 80% of life. We are in a recovery process, and that is part of what helps us to recover elements of our systems. I would like to recommend the governments by themselves or institutions by themselves won't be able to recover or heal an ecosystem. It's the people, those who have the knowledge and know the systems, are those who know that in 1 month it rains more or less, there are going to be pests or not pests. Then we know how to solve the climate change, and with the use of seeds is to empower people. After 92, there has been success. We have important conservation areas. We have protected areas. Costa Rica is an example that we lost almost We have recovered almost 60%, but we have to ask ourselves, the topic of conservation without the person can generate another problem, another unbalance, because people need to eat. They need access to these resources because they don't have other parts. So we should other way of conservation that local communities and indigenous people can use. We have traditional production systems. With the pandemic, it has shown that where we have land and knowledge, we have had no food problems, but also we've had traditional medicine in many lands in Latin America. No people have died from COVID, even though they have gotten infected. This is one of the things that you can see with the Fund for Indigenous People of Ayala. We have done some studies and good practices about COVID and important things that is important to strengthen that with natural resources. We have to empower indigenous economies. What COVID showed is that even though we have nature wealth, we have economic poverty, and we can revert this, as the professor said, using nature or bioeconomics. An example, in Costa Rica, we define a bioeconomics strategic. We have gone along a path where, at least in a region with a pilot plan, we're going to include 7 territories to empower bioeconomics and reactivate the economic because of COVID-19.
Within the global framework of 2020, we want to make 4 recommendations. The first one is that all the governments have to develop environmental strategies in the conservation systems using indigenous traditional systems or recognizing those systems. In parentheses, IUCN has already recognized a new concept of protected areas, indigenous protected areas, and we have to potentiate these topics. The other one has to do with protecting the traditional knowledge. Also, we think it is important in the 2030 agenda that has been in the global framework. Even our brothers in the Amazonian, they are saying that 80% of the work has to start in that region, but in other regions there are still concerns because perhaps there are no areas of conservation that could be excluding the indigenous people. That is why we consider, specifically in the Indigenous Biodiversity Forum, that we need to have a good goal, and for this we have to apply the consultation systems and especially the indigenous rights into all this, because this is necessary and urgent. And then also, and finally, we want to echo this version 65 of the Permanent Forum of the United Nations, of the indigenous people of the United Nations, that the General Assembly of the United Nations and the states and UNEP specifically, there should be indigenous participation in these entities, in the decisions that are made against marine garbage, plastic contamination, and the degradation of the ecosystems and landscapes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Donald. Some of us were asking us, Donald is precisely a representative of the Boruca indigenous people. He's in Costa Rica. He is in the southern area of the country. And recently he got a recognition from the FINA, from this indigenous fund. He got an award of the Order of the Fifth Sun. So he is a leader that is also very well known. Thank you very much and congratulations for that, Donald. Okay, with these elements, we are going to watch a 3-minute video, a synthesis of several of the environmental problems, and then we open the dialogue for us to get prepared. We're facing a triple crisis in the planet for climate change, biodiversity, and pollution. The well-being of youth and the future generations depends on a drastic and urgent change. What's the environmental condition in Latin America and the Caribbean? Our planet is going to an increase in temperatures of at least 2.7 degrees this century, and the increase will be even greater in South America and the south of Central America. If there is an increase in the temperature, 6 of the largest economies of the region can lose up to 17% of the GDP at the midterm. The last 2 years show the terrible consequences of this, going from hurricanes like Eta and Iota, then wildfires at Pantanal. Just in Honduras, hurricanes caused economic losses for more than $1 billion. And the fires in Pantanal destroyed a lot of the diversity. The region has privileged biodiversity, and we have to protect 1/4 of the land and the marine areas. The average of abundance in the population of a species has been reduced in 81% since 1970. The freshwater reserves in the region are being threatened by the planet warming, the increase of plastic contamination and wastewater. There is around 17,000 tons of plastic per day generated in Latin America and the Caribbean, and they commonly end up in the oceans. 85% of wastewater flow to the ocean without being treated. In the cities where 80% of the population live, there is poor planning in terms of population. 1/3 of the waste generated by citizens end up in open sky dumps. 9 out of every 10 people living in the cities have a bad quality of the air, and more than 90 million people still depend on contaminating fuel. 320,000 people live in these areas, and if we do not act in the cities in LAC, there will be consumption of resources 2 to 4 times beyond what is acceptable, and the emissions in the energy sector and transportation sector will be 2 times greater. The rural areas, where 60% of the neediest communities live, are severely affected by the overexploitation of land and an increase in production, food insecurity, and migration. COVID-19 pandemic has increased unemployment and inequality. Only 1% of the COVID funds in LAC have been coherent with the objectives for sustainable development, and the region is losing the opportunity of pushing its economy and transforming the paradigm for development based on the exploitation of the natural resources. So we have to act without delay. We have to reduce 50% of emissions of carbon dioxide before 2030. We have to stop all subsidy to fossil fuels at the production and responsible consumption. We have to invest in nature and promote innovative technologies. Decarbonization of transportation industries will create 35 million new employment. Redesigned urbanization plans can reduce consumption to half. And we have to help the cities generate and win the battle against poverty and inequality. Climate crisis, biodiversity, and pollution interact among themselves, and they have a common cause. They can be solved efficiently only if they are resolved together. Dear ministers, we have heard the science. I would tell Christiana and Enrique if you could stay here, because although we can kind of open the conversation and see if there's any question or whatever, I think it is worth, with so much knowledge, with so many proposals, it would be wonderful if we could establish a conversation. We open the second dialogue. I have here in my notes Minister Manrique from Ecuador, who is going to start with this open dialogue. Thank you very much, Minister, Madam Chair of the Forum, dear colleagues, and other members that are with us in this room. Thank you very much for this opportunity. These are really the types of spaces, regardless of the figures that you see over there, that really energize you, that really make you feel like doing things, making changes. I love the phrase of the morning that we are the equivalent of firefighters in front of a house in flames. And I was thinking about another metaphor, that the hummingbird was in the middle of a big fire while all the animals were running away in the opposite direction of the fire. This hummingbird was getting some water and bringing 2, 3 drops to the fire. He would come and go, and all of a sudden the king of the jungle said, "Hey, hummingbird, you're wasting your time." And the hummingbird said, "No, I'm doing what I can and the best I can." And I think that's us. We are the hummingbird. And I want to make echo of the call or the comment from my colleague Carlos Correa of going to Egypt with a concrete proposal, with a proposal where we have a sense of unity, where we are all working together. And I'm sorry that I'm taking as a reference what Costa Rica, Colombia, Panama, and Ecuador made, which was a picture that went around the world, where 4 ministers and 4 presidents were signing a map or an outline of a commitment to protect common areas. And I do want to focus, Minister, on my side. You can count on me to bring a joint proposal there. And I hope that all the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean could propose something concrete too, and not offer something for 2030, 2050, but announce something in September and even sign it before December. Julia, Christian, Henrik, Donald, thank you very much for your comments. And Minister, if you allow me, I want to tell a story, quite colloquial, quite narrative, of something where very graphically they have elaborated and what was the experience of Ecuador in the role of science and decision making. Ecuador, on January the 14th, created a new marine reserve in the Galapagos, incorporating 60,000 new square kilometers to the already existing 138,000 square kilometers. And I'm just talking about the part of Galapagos. With that, we got to 198,000 square kilometers, and we went from 13% of protected areas to almost 19% of protected areas, taking a leap of 40%. When we made the announcement, when President Lasso made the announcement in Glasgow that he was going to create this reserve, that was finally signed 75 days afterwards, several things attracted the attention. One of them was that he was going to sign it as soon as he was going to get to Ecuador, and it was really expedite. 2, that it was in consensus. And I think, and I would dare to say with regards to the environmentalists, that in political terms, this is what attracted the attention the most. And I'm going to tell you 2 reasons of why it attracted so much the attention to get to this consensus, because Ecuador has 2 characteristics. One, which I mentioned in the introductory words, we are the country with the highest index of child malnutrition per capita of the region. We do not have enough resources to give to the children in the first 2,000 days from birth what they need. And these are situations that are irreversible with our children, so we have that need. So it is interesting to see how a country, that I will describe the second characteristic that I was going to say, we are the largest country of the Pacific, of the East Pacific, with a fishing fleet. So you have the largest fishing fleet of the East Pacific, and then you have, among other needs, the largest chronic malnutrition in the region for children. Our income for fishing represents the 3rd or 4th income in the country. So that was interesting. And the third element that attracted the attention was that the president announced that exchange destined for nature, the greatest one, and I congratulate Belize for the great decision also in doing that. But Let's say that perhaps because of the proportion, the size of the country, this would be an exchange of debt, and by nature, that exceeds our financial mechanism, that exceeds some of the things that have been done in the world. But, Minister, the main reason was that we used science as a central point for decision making. This was a study or some concerns that started from Panama, from Costa Rica, Colombia, and Ecuador 20 years ago. Science started to wonder, are these the resident species? Are they 100% endemic from Galapagos? Do they travel all the way to Costa Rica, or do they go directly to Colombia? Where do they reproduce? What we do here, does it have a consequence over there? And Ecuador and these countries make a call to start studying each species. We choose the main ones, of course, and we tag them. We put GPSs to see their behavior, their speeds, their migratory routes, their capacities for reproduction, and so on. When we started to see that there were some species that would appear in Mexico, we would say, well, this goes beyond that, of course. Then maybe you know the case of the hope whale, a whale that became a hope for the world. It had a satellite, and we all followed it until one day that it stopped beating, and evidently a fishing boat captured it. And we got a capture in 2017 of a nation boat with 8,000 sharks. The collective of Galapagos becomes even stronger. We called international institutions. We involved the University of San Francisco in Quito, and we started to document this experience. So Galapagos, just as the majority, is a product of volcanic eruptions. You will know Ecuador as a mountainous country, but we are so mountainous as well as in the marine. And these coral reefs are the ones that select those routes. The shark, the turtle, the ray. They were saying that sea lions are migratory, but and then you also see what Carlos was saying. In my case, I was not taught that you would breathe the oxygen of the ocean, and 1 out of 2 breaths come from the ocean. So 1 out of 2 come from the ocean. So with this information, with this consensus, we got together, always with differences along the way. But there was a value promise of not moving forward if we were not in agreement on everything. We even didn't get into agreement with the other environmentalists because in the northern part, where we have Darwin and Wolf, this is what is known as not a category, but we define it as such, is the shark sanctuary, 47,000 square kilometers, where we have the hammer shark. But if we move a little bit more to the southwest, the turtle is the one that sails there. And if you move a little bit more, the one that sails is the ray, stingray. So there's some that have more inclination for taking care of the shark, others the stingray, others the turtle. So there was no consensus, but finally we decided to put it in the northern area, which connects us with Costa Rica. It is important, and I just want to launch a phrase from the first panel. In these multilateral alliances, multi-sector alliances, binational, that we have local problems, local issues that need global solutions. Ecuador, Ghana, Germany, and Vietnam made a call in Switzerland, in Geneva, 5 months ago, because Ecuador has the single-use plastic law. They have a law for circular economy. The main cities of Ecuador, they have some orders that ban the single-use plastic. The Galapagos, they have the carbon zero program. They have plastic bottles banned and so on. So dear friends, in the Galapagos, we get several thousand tons to our shores, and 83% come from other continents. 17% of them come from the Equatorian continent, and only 1% is generated by Galapagos itself. So we have some local issues that need international solutions or worldwide solutions. Finally, I want to tell you that we are in a final phase of the financial mechanism that we're going to use to be able to perpetually finance, because the idea is to make a trust fund where the capital that we get is going to be untouchable and we would only leave it from those interests to finance science, research, and hopefully also other conservation mechanisms. And right here, DFC plays a fundamental role in this mechanism for that exchange, and I end up saying that the only way, and the DFC is evidently making some consultations and interviews and meetings with NGOs, with sectional governments of Galapagos, with the municipalities, with the assembly, with organizations, and what we have said is go talk to all, because they are all in agreement. And that is the main reason. It sounds kind of poetic, but it's real. The name that we gave to this reserve is Brotherhood, because that is the message that Ecuador has to convey to the world. We have to work in brotherhood. The borders are made by human beings. Our species do not correspond to human beings. So that is why I want to invite finally the friends, the members of the Marine Corridor, to hopefully develop public conservation policies that are similar, because what we do here is going to have a consequence over there, and what they do there will have consequences here. So this is our experience when we use science as a central axis, and of course the dialogue, persistence, and other values that were used in the process. Thank you very much, Minister. That was very clear, very inspiring also. And a recent example, I would open the space. We had some kind of guiding questions, and we have Jamaica. Jamaica?
Madam Chair, thank you so much. I think we would all agree that the presentations just concluded have indeed been extremely insightful and mirror some of the challenges we all anecdotally and statistically know that we have in all of our countries. There are a few comments that jumped out at me from our presenters, and I wish to thank them for their presentations thus far. The first presenter, Ms. Carabias, I believe is the appropriate pronunciation. She said something that is true for all developing nations, not just in the environmental and the climate change space, but particularly true in this space. There are just too many documents, there are too many reports, there are too many strategies, and we take so long to implement them that in many ways some of the science and some of the data has shifted by the time we have had the political discussions around it. And I thought that was a very good place for us to start our discussion, because if we're going to discuss how we're going to bring science and statistics and reports into the policy-making space so that we're not having the same conversation in 5 years, I thought that was a very important acknowledgement for us to all have and make around this table. So I thought that was particularly important. She also mentioned the slow pace of restoration and these large targets that we all politically, when expedient and sometimes when appropriate, announce. And, you know, I'm sure in my country those examples exist. I'm sure in all of your individual countries they exist. I know in our case, we have set an ambitious target of replanting 3 million trees this year. I would have hoped we would be, well, by the end of this year rather. I would have hoped we'd have been a little further along, but we will do what we need to do to catch up throughout the course of the next 12 months or so. We may miss December, but we shouldn't be too far into the next year, but we are committed to that particular target. Mr. Sampierre, the commensurate data sharing, I think, is particularly important. Our commitment to transparency, as is noted in our own documentation and our declared commitments both at COP and elsewhere, is where we stand. And I encourage members to not just commit on in these fora, but to ensure that when we leave, we start the implementation process of ensuring that our data is captured in a transparent way so that we can have conversations that move into implementation. Mr. Salah, we've sat in other spaces, and I think the theme of the other space that we have engaged is ocean health, or rather there is no ocean wealth without ocean health, or some general frame to that effect. And I think that is at the core of what we need to discuss here today. A lot of our environmental degradation, and certainly in Jamaica's case, has resulted in significant impacts of our ocean health, an ocean that we all share. And I think that is a good place for us to start. The issue of marine litter is well known and well documented, but not necessarily well acted upon. I think many of us have taken preliminary steps in dealing with the scourge of plastic pollution. In Jamaica, we've taken a step and we started the implementation process of a plastic ban on 3 types of single-use plastics in 2019, which was straws, plastic bags, and indeed styrofoam containers. We have not moved as fast, and I know that this is the case for many of my neighbors, on the management, collection, recycling efforts for the elephant in the room, which in essence for most developing countries, not so much in Costa Rica, but certainly in Jamaica, is the plastic bottle problem. So whether you're going to explore a deposit refund scheme or going to invest in the sort of waste collection that is necessary, it is the issue that we need to deal with and that we need to come to a common ground on. Not just because of the use of virgin plastic and its own carbon footprint, but because it's literally killing our marine life and it's devaluing the coastal environment that many of us sell for our tourism. There is sports tourism, there is ecotourism, there is beach tourism, but there is no such thing as garbage tourism. And it is an issue that affects all of us, and we all contribute to each other's problems as we share. Many of us share the Caribbean Sea, and even on the Pacific side, I know we all contribute to each other's issues. So that is a point that I think we should all accept, and it should be a takeaway that we're going to deal with this issue. And it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all, but there has to be a single goal that we agree to, which has to be significant reduction of use of virgin plastic. It has to be significant. I know in my case, it has to be an astronomical growth of what we put into the recycling system. And in some cases where appropriate, you may want to cut use of certain types of single-use plastics altogether. And that's, I think, a good point. What's not often spoken about, because we deal with the nature-based solutions, there are some issues, especially in poor and developing nations like Jamaica, I know, like my colleagues who have had the opportunity to tour in the past in Haiti, where there's some infrastructure solutions that are simply required, and we should not complete the conversation without acknowledging these. If we're not covering man-made waterways appropriately and creating access points for garbage trucks, as simple and parochial as it sounds, to enter these communities that in many ways and in many times are the poorest amongst us, then there is no real way to stop solid waste entering our spaces. This same infrastructure is required to deal with liquid waste and other waste from factories. And we shouldn't leave the conversation without committing that we're going to explore this properly and come to a landing as a group. So I thought that took us into that particular space. The presentation from, I hope I pronounce it properly, the Baruka indigenous group was particularly important. And I like when we discuss indigenous rights, because at the core of the indigenous discussion, and as much as we should be protecting them, we also need to acknowledge that we own where we live. And we need to take the sort of ownership that indigenous communities exercise over their domains. And we as individual citizens and we as governments need to take that particular approach and that care for our environment in the way that the indigenous communities care for their smaller subsets of our countries. If we approach policy making in the way they approach management of their spaces, I think we will end in a better place. There is a line I'll use from my Prime Minister. He used it in 2017, and this, I think, will bring me to my closing. If we accept that we have challenges, but we accept that there can be no sustainable economic growth without environmental protection, and accept that there can be no inclusive prosperity steeped in pollution, then we find ourselves in a much better space in terms of the agreements that we will form and our implementation of same. The last point that you'd asked us to think about, I think we all know and may not have even documented yet that COVID has been bad for all of us. It's been bad for many of the agreements we've put in because, quite frankly, it has removed some of the economic space that we all needed as developing countries to put in place some of the things that we wanted to. But I think if we go back to the line that I would have just quoted from my Prime Minister Holness, we won't achieve the economic prosperity that we want and the social mobility for our people if we don't recenter in this new norm our strategies and our implementation around protection. I think the presentation from Mr. Sala was particularly important to show what comes on the back of protection. And that's what will take our fishing communities out of poverty. Many fishing communities throughout the region are amongst the poorest communities in the region. And I think that's a very good place for us to start today. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Good. Chile. I always tend to speak at the end. I'm going to be very brief. I want to thank to the speakers. I'm not go deeper into the role of science. It's something non-negotiable, and we know the importance of science on decision-making process. And regarding marine conservation plans, even though we have an exclusive zone, the next step is to have management plans, and that's where we need science to go with us and have capacity of enforcement, because I don't do anything, I don't have a protected area and I don't have enforcement. And with a satellite machines, we can do something and maybe propose to the members of this forum that we had a scientific group to be consultants, and we can contribute with our own scientists for the decisions of the forum with the best available science. Thank you. Panama? Good afternoon again. All the positions that are having, all the countries that are aligned here, I was listening to the Minister of Ecuador when he talked about science, and we talked with my team. We have the science, we have to implement it, because we have the information, the technology necessary and enough to reduce and revert the impacts we have caused. When we saw that moving video, I don't know you, but I got goosebumps and tears were coming out of my eyes. I hope all people were aware and understand the damage that we are causing our earth for the overexploitation of our resources and non-recovery of our areas. We have identified the conservation areas, so we have to conserve them, but not on paper. As it has been said, we need to accelerate those funds that we mentioned in the morning. And when we talked about the role of sciences, an example I can use, science can be the expansion of the protected marine areas that countries of the mar are doing, and it's good that now they've been discussed how to implement what is standardized after the signatures of the presidents in Glasgow. And this is because our region needs this type of standardization to protect what we have done, is the migratory species that we shared, and no way came, and the decision of expanding that Coiba mountain range is based on science, not only to reach 30% of our protected areas, but this area and connectivity that we have, then Ecuador, Costa Rica, and we will continue expanding that. We have to take into account that we are part of biodiversity. Biodiversity and the human beings are interconnected, but as I said, we are breaking our that balance, but it's not as that's why it's so important to have conventions as CITE that will be held in Panama in November, that I think that some of the migratory species are not included are there, and everything is included in scientific data as illegal trade of shark fins. So we're working on the risk temperature maps, rainfall, and elevation of sea levels. So then we can work in climate change scenarios. So we hope we will have this ready for April. To nature-based solutions, we need to have take into account the connection between land and ocean. They are linked. Whatever happens on land will affect the ocean, as we saw the plastics. For example, a perfect example is sedimentation and the increase of nutrients in the corals. It comes from the bad agricultural practices, but I believe and I am agreeing that our farmers are being aware that agriculture, cattle is very close to nature, and they understand that have to have good practices to have food sovereignty in their countries. So we need to see the projects of CEMAR and oceans and other in a comprehensive way. Thank you. Brazil? I lost a part of the first presentation, but I heard the others. Fishing, ocean and fishing is something that I see very close. Listening to the Minister of Jamaica, I couldn't avoid remembering the years I spent in Jamaica working there in Kingston and other topics. That's why my questions are aimed at Mr. Enrique Sala and fishing and fisheries preservation. And I have not heard that several of us are highly involved in occasions of OMC with fishing commercial scheme that protects our interests, not only on exclusive areas where we can do even with legal resources, even if we have enforcement problems. But in the high seas, where the fishing powers are, or great companies, how to do that, and especially for migratory species. I would like to see how you see negotiations, and we hope they are fruitful. How do you consider, out of the experience, I speak about those that are part of the Antarctic part. As you know, the Antarctic regime has a part of fishery protection and has important, reasonable results. And as my Chilean colleague knows, because his part, it has a scientific method that uh, contributes. And I would like to know that about that experience of some Latin American countries have could be used in the high seas, because that's the main challenge finally. And I thought like something like a story, the creation of fishing conservation areas near the coastal areas where there are traditional areas. Even if there's political will, it's not a simple negotiation. When my hair was blacker, I participated in some, and no one of that gave results because local communities are very resistant to let go of their subsistence, and our governments have no way to really give them the financial resources to provide options to that traditional activity they have very close to the coast. Even if we have some stories, success stories, not in those places are options that can be given touristic areas, diving, because objectively does not happen. And we have that experience even in other conventions like those the wetlands, for example. This is something that I wanted to mention. I don't know if I give the floor to the minister or if the ministry allows me that Enrique speaks and then we continue. And you are very right. It's very difficult to get to protect areas to help to regenerate marine life in coastal areas, even knowing that those areas will improve, will benefit local communities. We have cases, not enough, but we have cases all over the world, all oceans, where marine reserves that to protect part of the coastal area has benefited coastal communities. A rare association will publish a study that shows that for 200 communities of the World Triangle create to a core area without fishing, surrounded by exclusive access rights to local communities, has worked very well, has been able to increase the amount of life, but to double the amount of fish around, which has benefited communities. What you say is completely true. There is a transition period until communities start to obtain net benefits. That's the problem. The bridge financing is key. So part of incentives, if they continue to want to continue fishing, what is key is not ask them to do something else, but to provide funding to cover that period. Sometimes it's just 3 years. The Fiji Islands, they increase the amount of oysters in only 3 years. The clams increase 7 times the amount, would benefited the so the roadblock that more important is, as you said, support the fishing communities during that transition process. From what we can learn from the process in Antarctic, they created the marine reserves, the largest protected area in Roche Ocean, more than 1 million square kilometers, and they required the consensus of 25 countries, including China and Russia, that were opposed at the beginning. So you are right that we can choose very well how to use environmental diplomacy to get objectives that will benefit all nations, not only just a few. Thank you, Enrique. And I think when we talk about this transformation of our economies is to adopt new technologies, fishing. It is something that requires financial support, and many times is how we take them to the fishermen, farmers, those who are using this technology. And this is part of what we have to discuss, because these are the real challenges. No fishermen will do it. And this is the same all over the world. That resistance is something that we face. Important thing is to know the price of this precision, to channel those resources in an effective way to those who are adopting that technology. Thank you. I wanted to ask two of the questions. One is the science and policy interface and at education. In our countries, I think something happens to all of you is that scientists are on one side and politicians are on the other side. And there's a very big gap. And this is happening today. The politicians that are here haven't been able to connect with the next generation, younger than 28. The language is not the same. So we are talking about the same thing with different language. If we are not able to close that gap between science and politics, we won't be able. And today, technology, something that Christian mentioned, is allowing us to have data for decision making. It's not just gut decisions we have to protect. No, why? What is there in that ecosystem? How many birds? How many species? And today, technology allows us to get all the information gathered throughout many years and do data analysis, predictions, big data, and this gives us great possibilities. So we have to invest more in technology and link science and politics so they understand the same language. If a scientific speaks to a politician, maybe he won't understand. So we know what language to use. For example, Enrique's presentation saying that fishing has an emission as the airplane industry. This is science. That is science, but in a very easy language, easy to understand. Now we're talking about all the funds. We should talk about science and environmental education. I always talk about education because no one understands what is protected area. When I say no one, not the ones that are here, I mean 99% of people who are out there, who are the ones who will protect. So education that allows to equal. When you go to the first semester, the professor has to make those who know less to catch up with the others. So we are working to see how we can articulate it. In August, we created environmental training school. It's called Savia. And we are creating all the contents with the Humboldt Institute and others with all the scientific information. And we have people that are doing storytelling. How to take that and make very good stories. It starts with environmental natives. So all the children 1 to 5 start to classify the waste, how to plant a tree. and we included that in the climate action law in 2030 from elementary school up to university. And non-formal education have to have a climate change in the curriculum. I say this not a success story, how to include education to join science and politics. And I think there are resources, all the funds and our donors are interested in environmental education, and I think it can be something important. I talked with Enrique. National Geographic has free education, but we have to shape the contents. What is a conserved area? What is a 30-30? All these things, circular economy, moors, wastelands, and impact of COVID pandemic in Latin America on the environment. Our is very close to us and it's creating a conflict. I think this is something that we have to see, and the opposite. The pandemic made us see that there is biodiversity and environment that we have to conserve, but from here on it will continue happening, pandemics and all things, because of the effects of affectations of natural resources. So with the funds, it's not only restoration, native plants, where to do it, how to restore it. It's not just planting trees, it's to restore, but to include in those resources science, technology, key for that, and also to use those resources that we can join in all our countries, and to shape those projects based on science to make better decisions. I think we still need data and science, but the knowledge is there. The information is there. What we're not doing is using it correctly for decision making. That was my thought. FAO is online. Thank you. Mr. Chairperson, Minister Mesa, Ministers of Environment, Agriculture, and Food. Food systems are core scenarios to achieve multilateral environmental agreements. Many of you in your interventions have mentioned that, but also there is an increase in that agreement that without of the transformation of this system, it will be impossible to mitigate the climate change, to protect or revert desertification. I want to mention that we will move faster and more effectively if we establish a respectful dialogue between the productive centers of food and agriculture, environmental diversity, and climate. Both in the government area with the ministers of environment and agriculture, and also in the center of the markets and civil society. I'm clear it's not an easy task and not free of risks, but I think if confrontation continues in both worlds, the progress will be more difficult and slower. As far as environmental awareness expands in the political decisions of the governments and logics of the markets, the convergence points will increase. At FAO, we believe that we can use better use the environmental multilateral agreements. To facilitate this dialogue, for example, the action plan for the decade of restoration in Latin America that was introduced in the last forum of ministers last year. We can also include these dialogues logic in collaboration in projects and the flagship for Central America that we're preparing now with the United Nations multi-donor centers and with the participation on FAO, UCM, UNEP, and CIFOR. Particularly important is the Fund for the Environment, Adaptation and Green Climate Fund that include criteria that will motivate us for the collaboration between production and environment. FAO will continue working with you and ministers of agriculture so the policies for production promotion internalize the sustainability criteria and for mitigation of climate change. It cannot be that productive policy goes on one side and environmental policy on another side. They have to meet environmental and climate goals are 56% of work of FAO in Latin America and Caribbean measured by budget, and it is with no doubt the component of our work that grows faster. This shows not only the commitment of FAO with a better environment, but mainly it's a direct indicator of what the countries of the region, the ministries of agriculture, are demanding from an agency specialized in food and industry, more resilience and more information. I think this is a good sign of times. That's why we want to ratify the request we did, the part of the group of support to ministries of environment of Latin America, Caribbean, to strengthen our cooperation with all of you. Thank you, Ms. Ministry.
Esta reflexión
Thank you. Thank you very much for that reflection and for being connected virtually. I think that there are very interesting things coming out. Specialized study centers in the region, Humboldt, well, there is a series of centers in Brazil and Chile. So if we start, yes, there is a lot of scientific capacity, but we see that there is still a lot more to do in that interface on how to facilitate the access to the decision makers. Ambassador, you raised the flag again? Yes? Okay, and in that line, that's the kind of reflection, right? And you have put several ideas on the table that are very interesting. We are taking note of that. And I will now give the floor to Brazil, and then UNEP also wants to talk about this. Well, I didn't have the intention of interrupting you, Madam Minister, but the representative from FAO reminded me of something that I had written down to comment on this occasion, and in a way he referred to, although indirectly, recently and in the summit of the food systems, I think that is the name that it has, the ICA, that is based in Costa Rica. Actually, Costa Rica is the headquarters of several very relevant Inter-American organizations, the Court and the Inter-American Institute of Cooperation for Agriculture. So they made a very efficient coordination with the ministers of agriculture of the region to present a contribution that I think is very enriching and goes a lot in line with what the representative from FAO has just said with regards to the need for us to avoid and also move forward for the productive sector and the environmental policies to be aligned, to work together and to be reinforced. I think that reflection had been made today in the morning by several of the speakers, even myself, but I think that this is a very concrete example by our ministries of agriculture of how it is possible to make a very interesting contribution, a very rich contribution, even in terms of that alignment for the summit of the food systems. So I think that this is an example that we have to take into account and put into our focus. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Jacqueline? Yes, thank you very much, Madam Minister. My participation here is partly triggered by the comments from Colombia, but also by what we have been hearing. And I think I didn't hear anybody saying that science is not the base for decision making. People commented about the pandemic and that deforestation was one of the big triggers of being in the situation in which we are today. And I want to kind of go several years back first and quickly and reflect a little bit, for example, about the dengue. As you may have noticed, because of my accent, I am coming from Uruguay. There was no dengue in Uruguay. It was very difficult to find the mosquito. If we had any case, it was an imported case. Those were not cases that were endemic. At a moment, the story started to revert, and they blamed the transporter movements of people, the airplanes that bring the mosquito. But when we started the investigation a little bit more solidly and deeply, the reason why dengue was able to cross was deforestation. The deforestation that was taking place between the countries in the north and Uruguay. Uruguay doesn't have the right weather, but if the conditions occur in a different way, then dengue appears. And nowadays, all the school children, all the actions that are taken, take that principle and that concept into account. Once again, we are attacking the consequence. We are not tackling the origin. Today, the topic of deforestation, we know all the causes, we know all the consequences, and we know what it implies. In the countries of the region, we can talk about the Dominican Republic and Haiti. We see the maps. We see that the country is more deforested with a very different environmental condition to what the country, the same island has. But particularly what I want is to bring to your knowledge, for those of you that are going to be present in UNEA, and I'm very happy because Minister Correa has come back, because particularly my comment is based on what you were saying. And you were reflecting about education, about science, about politics, and you were saying, why is it that policy or that science has to be used for the politics, for the politics of policy, for decision making, but also policies have to guide science, so that research is linked to priority topics at the national level. So investigation research in itself is very important. It is essential, and it highlights the knowledge at the long term. But we also have to respond to some questions that nowadays are not clear. As you might have heard, or as you know, because you're going to be present in UNEA, one of the resolutions that is proposed, and the ambassador is going to tell us a little bit more about this, is precisely to adopt at the global level the creation of an entity, a panel for political science, in a topic that is one of the pillars of the planet crisis. As you know, we have climate change that has a scientific panel, which is the one that has said the 1.5, and is the one that brings a lot of information for biodiversity. We have a panel, which is the IPVerse, that perhaps something that ECOS is one of the things that they put into consideration is everything that has to do with the neonicotinoids, which are the products that are used as pesticides in agriculture, but they kill our bees. So this is in the knowledge precisely because of that particular situation and that particular forum of the exchange in political science. The third pillar, which is the one that has to do with pollution, chemicals, and waste, does not have that. There's some domains from which we can get information, but we don't have like a panel that would allow us to make that translation of what the scientist is saying, as we saw today, in a very simple language for the well-guided decision-making, or vice versa, but neither to train or to update the indigenous knowledge that we have, the knowledge that exists in each region. So you are going to have in front in UNEA that resolution that is now proposed by the Swiss government, Norway, and within the countries of the region, Uruguay is one of the entities, or the one of the countries that is being the co-sponsored. Costa Rica is another that is doing the co-sponsorship. And perhaps I would dare to say something that maybe I shouldn't, but I have heard, Bert told me that perhaps Colombia is also supporting the resolution as a co-sponsor. So it would be really very valuable if the region from this forum, you can tell us a little bit about the profile or the feeling of this, talking to the Dominican Republic. We have to see this, the need for this forum. And then to finish, I want to make a very short reflection. As I said, I was coming from Uruguay, and when I was a little girl, I was told that Uruguay was the promised paradise at the Valley of Eden, because we had water, we had prairies, we had everything that we needed. At that moment, I didn't understand because I was a little girl. But when you grow, you realize that Latin America is the valley, really, of Eden. We can accomplish a lot of things. So with this reflection, what I want to say is that we have in our hands the capacity to define. And in this case, we have the data, we have the science, and they're telling us things. They're shouting things to us. So each one of us will have to see where is it that we want to progress. Thank you very much, Madam Minister. Thank you, Jacqueline. We have a communication from the Minister of Guatemala that had also asked for the floor. So we're going to give him the floor. Madam Executive Director of UNEP, Ingrid Anderson. Madam Chair of the 23rd Forum of Ministers of the Environment of Latin America and the Caribbean, Honorable Andrea Mesa, Minister of the Environment and Energy of Costa Rica, colleagues, ministers, greetings from the heart of the Mayan world. As always, it is an honor to share with you as the Minister of the Environment and Natural Resources of Guatemala. These spaces are important because they allow us to establish dialogues that derive in strategies and plans that reduce the deforestation rate, improve forest governance, and strengthen livelihoods through the ecosystem services provided by the forests. The Ministers of Environment of Central America and the Dominican Republic that are part of the Central American Commission of Environment and Development, CCID, we value the importance of the restoration of the forest landscape, a tool to recover the integrity, the ecological integrity, and to maintain the natural balance that would allow us to preserve the local benefits and the global benefits, as well as dynamize the local economy, guarantee the access to food and water in quality and quantity, minimize the negative impacts of climate change, and strengthen the livelihoods. We are aware of the need to strengthen the adaptive capacity of our ecosystems, and we recognize the importance of the forests as one of the best examples of nature-based solutions. Guatemala, in the update of its nationally determined contribution, NDC, incorporates in the component of adaptation proposals to find nature-based solutions and to manage the ecosystems in an integral way, articulating the approaches of ecosystem conservation and biodiversity, promoting a socio-economic development that is sustainable. The forests of Mesoamerica allow for carbon reserves as well as fresh water in the region, something that is vital for the development, the protection, and the preservation of the environment. That is all part of the structure of a sustainable economic development. Aware of the recovery of the livelihoods through the use of less extractive models that in turn intend to get to the productive development of the country. Guatemala is committed to continue developing pertinent actions through planning instruments and funding. which have allowed to have significant progress, such as the National Strategy for the Restoration of the Forest Landscape, an interinstitutional effort that gathers or groups different sectors, and this allows to articulate actors and instruments that make the investment and implementation of restoration activities viable for forests and forest lands in Guatemala. The landscape restoration process in Guatemala is a response to the local and the global need, a state commitment, and a process that is integrated to an international initiative at a large scale, which represents opportunities to reach the adaptation of vulnerable populations in the country. The strategy has the institutional support, technical and financial support of the different sectors of the country that have promoted its creation, and with big projects, also the implementation in the different categories of restoration. Another valuable legal instrument in reaching our objectives that have allowed for the necessary financial flow for the implementation of actions in the territories is the law for the promotion of the establishment, recovery, restoration, management, production, and protection of forests in Guatemala, ProBosque, through which we're expecting to stabilize the reforestation rate and the protection of water and soil to improve the well-being of 1.5 million people per year, out of which 30% of women are heads of the household, and they contribute 5 billion quetzales to the rural economy with social benefit and generation of over 20,000 direct jobs and 60 indirect jobs per year. In this way, we work together for our forests and for our people. We move forward in the strengthening of our climate resilience. Thank you very much. Thank you. We had a brief message from UNESCO, but I think that we can make the synthesis. Okay? Thank you very much. Well, we are reading. We have a message from UNESCO from Juan Criado, and it says, excellent from science for such a necessary change. Thank you to the 4 speakers, to Costa Rica, and to all the ministers of this extraordinary region. To conciliate, transform, participate, and work together in this challenge to stop the inequalities, generate wealth and nature and bioeconomy with indigenous people and local communities. Excellent, and congratulations again to the 4 chairs of UNESCO for the great commitment in protected areas through an ambitious reserve of the marine biosphere. Through the borders, nature and people are in harmony. Okay, colleagues, I think that this has been a panel that is putting a lot of things over the table. We have the data over there, the knowledge the minister was saying, the minister of Colombia said that is over there. We have to use that better in a more effective way. We have to give more value to it, and we have to give more value added to that great wealth and that potential that biodiversity has in the region. We're taking notes. These are going to be elements that are going to be in the summary that we're making. I would say that we can close here to be able to have our coffee break so that you get some energy back, to have some energy for that last panel. And it's just a proposal. According to the agenda, we should start at 4:45. I would propose that maybe we get up and we can start at 4:30 to see if we can finish a little bit before the time. Okay? Yes? Okay, so let's get up, get the coffee, and get ready for the last panel, the last dialogue for today. Thank you.
Allons plonger vers les cieux de Méditerranée. Échappons-nous vers l'horizon.
Ministers, let's come back to the room to continue the dialogue so that we can leave earlier. I think we're all going to be very happy if we can leave a little bit earlier. Ministers, delegates, the sooner we start, the sooner we leave. Thank you. Let's see. We are getting into our last high-level dialogue for today. And it is precisely a space where we would like all of you to have clear information on what's going to happen in Gununea. You have heard that many things have been discussed. We're going to go as environment ministers to that big forum. This is the space where the ministers of environment get together from the whole world. So we thought it was important to know about this. We have a panel where we're going to have Ambassador Joana Valverde, that is precisely our ambassador in Nairobi. And she made the favor of coming and being here. We're also going to have a representation from some group of collectives, because I also have youth groups over there and other different stakeholders. And also a message, which is a video from the chair of the forum. In this case, the forum has been chaired by the Minister of Norway. And well, clearly because of schedules and time zones, he was not able to be connected, but he's really aware of this and very attentive to what we are going to get as summaries and input from this discussion. So without further ado, I would then ask at this moment our three panel members if they can go over there to the chairs where you will be put into the spot so that we can start with this part of the dialogue. I would understand that as they go to the chairs, we're going to begin with the video and the message from the chair of the forum, Minister Barth from Norway.
Yes, Senora.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon.
To be with you in this ministerial meeting. I will send a particular greeting to my friend, to the host of the meeting, and my fellow bureau member, Andrea Mesa. And also to all of you, and I hope to see everyone here joining us in Nairobi in a little bit more than a month for what I hope will be one of the most impactful United Nations Environmental Assemblies ever. We have a really important task ahead of us. More than 2/3 or 3/4 even of the membership of UNEA has now agreed that we should aim towards creating a strong mandate for negotiations towards the Universal Treaty on Plastic Litter. The plastic problem has risen to the attention of all of us over the last years. We are simply throwing way too much plastic into the ocean, which then ends up in destroying nature, in the stomach of fish, and eventually come into us. It's a serious matter and requires solid international collaboration. We can only achieve this goal together. I know that many of you have been in the forefront of raising this issue, and I salute that. And I hope that we can agree on making the treaty as strong as possible, so it goes far enough up the value chain in order to make sure we go from a use and throw away culture to a much more circular plastic economy, and of course also see if we can reduce the overall use of plastic in total. We have other agenda points as well. We have important resolutions, and we will have very inspiring discussions, I hope, on the proposed resolution on nature-based solutions. I believe that what has happened over the last few years is that the recognition that nature is part also of the climate solution, that is not only about reducing emissions, it's also about strengthening nature's ability to work as a carbon sink, and also to provide the key nature services that we need to look after the climate, while also preserving biodiversity. And that all of this again connects to chemicals and to pollution, and how do we make sure that we reduce the amount of polluting substances in our environment down to a bare minimum and eventually get rid of them. All of these issues, which are all very high on the agenda of environmental organizations, environmental ministers, and everybody working on this all over the world, will be key in the meeting that we will have in Nairobi at UNEA 5.2. I hope really to see you there. I trust your strong dedication to this inspiring cause, and I really look forward to engage in fruitful and constructive dialogues with all of you, recognizing the strong importance of Latin America and the Caribbean and all of you there in raising this question to the global agenda. Thank you very much for the attention, and good luck with today's meetings.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias al ministro.
Thank you very much to the Minister of Norway. We have 1 month to get up to date. Several have been working, several countries have been working. Those that have precisely ambassadors in Nairobi sometimes are more aware of many of the discussions. There are countries that no, not all the countries have representations there. So if that is the case, we need to find ways to facilitate everyone to be there, this forum to be more informed. And that's part of the spirit of this closing session. So we have this luxurious panel to make a quick recap of those decisions. We have been listening throughout the day, some plastic topics, but there are more things happening. And I would then give the floor to Ambassador Valverde for her to tell us or share with us what is happening and the preparations for UNEA, and then that also will serve as the basis to define whether or not we want to provide feedback, how into this discussion process, and get prepared for this meeting in a little bit less than a month. So thank you very much, Ambassador. Perfect, thank you very much, and greetings to all the ministers present here. It is a real honor for me to be here sharing with you. As Minister Mesa indicated, I am the ambassador and permanent representative with the United Nations organizations in Nairobi, Kenya. And I would like to share with you very quickly the resolutions that we have been discussing and negotiating during the last 6 months. Because I hope that the majority of you participate in the negotiations of UNEM 5.2, which is going to be from February 28th to March the 4th. And we consider that it would be important to have like a joint position in those resolutions that are relevant and that have the greatest impact for the region. That, as Minister Mesa said, that plastic is one of the most important ones. But there are others, and I would like to share this with you very generally. I hope you do not get bored because we're going to go like very quickly. It is 16 resolutions, and 2 of them have the support from most of the countries of the GRULAC that are over there. The first 3 days of the session of the week are going to be devoted to UNEA 5.2, which is negotiations from these resolutions, and Thursday and Friday, March 3rd and 4th, is going to be for the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the UNEP, and that is going to be an important space for all of you to be able to approach the topic of the future and to know what you want as GRULAC as a region. And I think that a lot of the things that have been discussed this morning reflect the importance or the priorities that could be important for you to present in that space. So I'm going to begin. Before beginning, actually, I would like to tell you that it's important for you to know that we have the G77 in China in the world of negotiations, and we are very happy that GRULAC had to take that role for the whole of 2022, and it has been Colombia that is going to take that important challenge and leadership during this year. I also want to congratulate Ambassador Erasmo Martinez from Mexico, who is the vice chair in the Committee of Permanent Representatives, and he has helped us in this process that has been a little bit difficult over the last 6 months, trying to put the resolutions a little bit in order. And we were able to group them in 5 clusters. And there are 2 countries from GRULAC, Costa Rica and Colombia, that will be co-facilitators in one of those clusters. So with this, I'm going to start telling you about the resolutions, and then I will give the floor to my 2 panel colleagues here so that we get into analyzing the resolutions more in depth. Technical assistance, please. Okay, so the first resolution that we have is nature-based solutions, which was presented by the European Union with the co-sponsors, and that's Costa Rica and Colombia. What do we want with this resolution? To define the term of nature-based solutions, to specify the problems or challenges we want to solve with that. Invite for investment in education, communication, awareness raising, research and development, which, by the way, I was talking to the ambassador the minister from Colombia, I'm sorry. And we're talking about the importance of education, and this is something that we see in a lot of these resolutions. The important part in all this resolution is how to guarantee the financing of all the actions that are implemented with this vision of nature-based solutions. And we're mentioning the declaration of the Glasgow leaders, where the United Kingdom was committed or engaged to providing a very important amount for the implementation of these projects. And it was requested to the Secretary to help us with a roadmap to be able to access the financial resources, because from the perspective of the ambassadors over there, this has been the main problem, and several ministers mentioned this today, because sometimes it is difficult to have access to the resources from the Green Climate Fund or the GEF, and the idea is to facilitate this process of having access to the resources. The second resolution is the one that has already been mentioned several times, and I will really congratulate Peru and Rwanda for the launching of this proposal, which started as marine waste and microplastics, and it has evolved in the last year to be able to fight in order to approve the establishment of a intergovernment negotiation committee known as INC, with the mandate of negotiating the fight against plastics, but the complete cycle of plastics. This is something very important, because initially we were only thinking about the marine approach, but now we are talking about upstream to downstream and focused with a vision of a circular economy. So as you can see over there, we have the support or co-sponsors of more than 47 member states, and Latin America, we're 18 Latin America. So this would probably be the most important one that could have a significant impact for the whole region and the whole planet. Parallel to this, Japan presented another resolution exactly on the same topic, but they want this to be limited just to marine contamination. So part of our work over there is to try to see if we are able to work jointly in order not to have two resolutions in the same subject matter, and try to make it as ambitious as possible. Let's see. I will go very quickly over this, but the African group presented 3 resolutions, one about circular economy,
circular en todos los planes de desarrollo nacional.
To integrate circular economy in all regional plans with access to accessible green funding, specifically on an approach on SMEs. We have resilient infrastructure presented by Mongolian, and the executive director that provide technical assistance as support for capabilities for investments in sustainable infrastructures, especially blue. Then we have green recovery by the African group, that we found a common response to improve cooperation and partnerships between government and non-governmental roles and private-public partnerships. The thing with these resolutions is that some are very ambitious and request the support of UNEP for these actions. Others are greener, to say it somehow. And the third from the African group is biodiversity and health, to strengthen policies of biohealth through both CD 2020 and IPES and other platforms. This has been a lot of discussion around this. Sri Lanka submitted sustainable management of nitrogen. This is more technical, and the goal is to reduce in 50% nitrogen waste for 2030, covering all nitrogen cycles. And this through a coordination mechanism between existing conventions, INCOM, and SNM for nitrogen sustainable management. Then I don't know if you know the GO Outlook, a report created by the Secretariat of UNEP, and so we address this ad hoc group. Animal well-being and link with sustainable development. This has with 5 countries, with Africa and Pakistan, and they request the executive director to promote animal well-being in the program of the UN about environment. There was some discussion that it was not the place for this. We will see what happens. This one by Indonesia and supported by Pakistan is sustainable management of lakes, seen from the vision that lakes have more than 90% of fresh water and on land surface, so their use, rational use and restoration is necessary, and they request UNEP to create an entity to start the coordination process and improve the South-South and Triangle cooperation. And this is the last one, 3 proposals made by Switzerland. And one of them was what was mentioned by the director of regional UNEP, and it is the one that has to do with the creation of scientific panel, science and policy to support action on chemical products, waste and pollution, submitted by Switzerland, co-sponsored by the countries you can see there. Costa Rica is one of them. And the idea is to create a scientific panel to address chemical products, waste, and pollution, because we have an EPCC that provides the scientific information we need for greenhouse gas, but there is no space to address from a scientific standpoint with solid information these problems or issues. Governance of mineral resources, submitted by Suiza, co-sponsored by Argentina and 3 African countries to create an ad hoc working group to assess together with UNEP the reduction of environmental effects on minerals and complete life cycle of mines. And last one, submitted by Switzerland, is rational management of chemical products and waste. They asked to continue the support for the 5th meeting on chemical products meeting. I hope you were not extremely bored. These are the things that will be agreed in ANOMA Point 2. We're going to open up space if one of the ladies or gentlemen ministers want to ask a question, or we continue. Thank you, Madam Ambassador. 2 important elements to clarify What Ambassador Valverde gave us was a description of the resolution proposals that will be seen at UNEP. Here, we won't adopt or approve anything. We just wanted everyone to know what are the others that will be seen in Nairobi, just in case someone didn't have, so you can get prepared, get in touch with your ambassadors. That's the idea of this. They asked me, are we going to share yes, we're going to share everything we have discussed here. It's information to all of us, even the video. So we're asking the technical teams. Part of what new situations is to listen non-state voices, the youth in the region. We have representatives, and I thank Lorena Terrazas and Vania Olmos that are here to share their thoughts, why the spirit from this forum, why the spect in UNEA, because it's important input for the conversation we're going to have. Lorena? Thank you, Madam Minister. Good afternoon to all the authorities that are here. As facilitator of this group, civil society, main groups, and stakeholders, it's important that this context of pandemic has been a challenge to increase the participation of non-governmental institutions here. We want to thank the support of the regional UNEP office to provide, giving us your support, logistic assistance, to have two regional consultations. We have a priority agenda that we want to share that I think goes linked to mandate decisions and needs we have from civil society, and I want to mention, that's why it's important to mention that these spaces are comprised by organizations from academia, scientists, youth, indigenous people, women that are participating. And part of this agenda, we have identified the problems of climate change in our region, linking it with the need to complete to SDG 13, but also to find in a locally the solutions regarding the search for knowledge from indigenous populations and have a holistic view of what we want to achieve after the climate crisis. Also, a transforming tool that has been mentioned is environmental education. We need new paradigms, but we also need investment in environmental education, be it formal and non-formal education. That is what we do and we follow as NGO. It's also important to mention that in the area of environmental governance, we have highlighted the need to ratify the Escazú agreement. Was a priority tool for our region. It's important that the countries that have not approved this put it in their agenda, and Latin Americans, I think, we think will increase the participation and protection of access rights. We have to rescue, that is urgent, to work a common position in the countries of the regions to adopt agreements that cover the life cycle of plastics. Even though there is a resolution on the table, it's important that the region acts and expands this vision regarding the proposal of UNEP. We need other countries to promote public policies that go this way. There are other concerns that go together with energy transition, economic recovery that includes circular economy, the loss of biodiversity that you have mentioned, management of solid waste, that is a Latin American problem, but global problem, but with priorities. So it's important to talk on how we focus sustainable finance. And I want to refer that the pandemic did not stop the environmental crisis. It continues in spite of the health crisis. So we need to thoroughly revise finances and investment for sustainability in all our decision makers' decisions, in your case that you are environmental leaders in our countries, and also mention that it's important that you consider that civil society has proposals and we are working, there are specialists, there are representatives, scientists that can give you technical as consultancies. I would urge you to summon different spaces of civil society because we need that interaction between the work we do from the private sector and what you do from the public policies. I want to say that it is important to change that vision and be strategic partners to take these common goals, because you can see that our agenda goes together with the decisions, and we want to promote more ambition to UNEA. So I would like to finish mentioning that we will be announcing dialogue spaces and proposals. Will disseminate good practices, observatories where we want to consolidate and show the work done by the civil society for the decisions that governments make. And call all of you to reflect. We know that Mother Earth is not only talking to us, she's screaming, we need to do something, now is the moment, and we have to take into account because we are against the time. Thank you. Thank you, Lorena. Vania Olmos, to show the vision of the youth and children. Thank you. I'm Vania Olmola, Regional Facilitator for the main program of youth and childhood of UNEP. Before I tell you, I'm going to tell you a little short story. I was born on June 5th, 1992. On that date, you will remember better, they were celebrating the Day of the Environment at the Rio Summit. I was very curious to know what happened on that day, so I went, Googled it, and I called my attention a photo where there's a white wall where the leaders that went to that summit were writing their promises to all the babies that were being born that day, like me. In 30 years, big things have been achieved. The ozone hole has been stopped. There are many resolutions have been made, and this is great. My mother said that when she was small, your children won't know whales. And Eric Salak talked about Cabo Pulmo, and I saw many whales. So it was achieved, and what they have in common is cooperation, that the countries agreed to achieve this. This is the good thing. However, almost 30 years since the leaders of the world promised that to the babies that were born that day, like me, it took many years of my life to know a river. And I don't think things are worse for those who were born after me. Also, I've seen destroyed ecosystems. And to close this day, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for a little while and you bring to your mind a natural place that you knew and does not exist anymore. In my case, is the southeast forest or jungle that I met. You went to the road and there big iguanas. And it does not exist anymore. So this is the things that the youth sees every day, and we don't want to do that. I know also that to think that the loss of this ecosystem is something that it will not look nice. No, it translates in communities without water, without their livelihoods. And let's stop and let's leave the past behind. How do we move forward? The best science, as Lorena says we have 8 years to avoid a crisis. Global crisis. So we have 8 years to act. The decisions made today will be seen in 8 years. It's not that in 2030 we start taking action. I will be 37 at the time. If the pandemic showed us something, is who suffered more than the children and the youth. How many children have been locked for 2 years? They have not been able to see nature, to enjoy with their friends and the social development. I had a very nice childhood. In spite I lived in a neighborhood that was not so nice. I went out and played with my friends. And many children don't have that opportunity. I'm sure that you don't want that legacy for the youth and the children that are coming. Let's think that we cannot have economies based on carbon-based economies. There's no time for that, and it's something that we see as an option. There's no time for that. There's no time for nature economies based on green revolution or open pit mining. There's no time for this. What are we doing, the youth? What are we doing in the way to UNEA? What we have doing is consultations as general civil society group. We have doing specific consultations for youth. Something that I want to mention for the youth of Latin America, fear of repression and violence. And I want to tell you a number. David Cocuñame, a 14-year-old, shot to death because he participated in the defense of his territory. So ratify Escazú, please, and ratified and implemented. That's the most important thing. Implementation, talk at environmental education. That is all the time. All the youth wants environmental education, but not something that is just little projects. Environmental education has to be institutionalized from the ministries of education to primary education to university. Otherwise, there are going to be just little projects of environmental education. My environmental education comes from National Geographic documentaries, but not everyone can see that. That's why it needs to be institutionalized. If you want to know more about the results of the consultations, you can go to the ministry forum and go to the tab civil society and youth. It was as brief as possible, so it's easy to read and people pay attention. So I invite you to see this. We're going to have a youth assembly the days prior to UNEA in Nairobi. It was going to be hybrid. We got funding to take 40 young persons from all over the world. We were looking at the resolutions, so we'll be present in UNEA, and we will have youth, environmental and regional assemblies or meetings. There's going to be one for Latin America, so you include your young people. From those 40 young people that will go, please research and see who from the youth of your country will be there. So now taking advantage that they will be there, that you know each other, and when you come back to your country, include the youth for the implementation. Not only in international spaces, you have to commit. You have to come back to your countries and do this together with the youth. And we're going to ask from you a little bit of sensibility, because sometimes when at last we get this dialogue with the government of your countries, yeah, the government presents the marvelous projects in Mexico, and has happened. The youth wants a dialogue, and it's one directional. Youth, look at what all we're doing in the government. No, it has to be bi-directional. So you know that the youth is doing. There's youthfornature.org. There's a map, and you can see the map of the world, of all the actions are doing, what the youth is doing in your country. So this is what the youth are doing, and a last message we want from you. That it's possible that there are three types of ministers, and they can all contribute. The first, is there because something political, and maybe they don't know a lot about the topic, but it's good that it's there. And for that type of minister, please get help, assistance. If you're there because someone put you there, please learn. There is not much time, and learn from the best possible science. I'm sure there are many scientific consultants that can help you. The second type of ministers that are married with the topic, but could be blindfolded, ideological blindfolded. This is happening in the world. There are discourse of us against them. We need to remove that ideological blindfold and talk and cooperate, because we cannot imagine a new world. To that minister, we ask to learn even from the people they don't agree with, because we need to learn to listen to both sides. And lastly, the ministers that are there for conviction and don't have this ideological bias and want to work with cooperation, our message for you is, even though society doesn't seem, they have the most important position of this time. You, as environment ministers, have the most important role the world is looking for, is that to save us from a global crisis. Don't let anyone tell the opposite. You are very important for your countries and the world, because we all share this house. Just to finish, if you don't know how to include the youth in your processes, you can come to me. I'm going to be here tomorrow also. And from UNEP youth program, we are willing to cooperate. Without the youth, won't do it. The youth are the majority population in the world. Thank you. And I wish you a good day today and tomorrow. Thank you, Vania. She didn't leave anyone aside. We thank you for really touching all of us, and the importance of the ministries of environment. It's great. It's a key position, strategic position, and we are going to we open up a dialogue space to close this part of today with the input we've heard, understand the topics. There were some reference questions, and I have here that Peru, the Vice Minister Castro, is online. And then we go to our closing reflection, and I would like to share with you what I have been doing and taking notes, because at the end of the dialogue we're going to have a summary from the chairman. So I would like to share the notes. Vice Minister, go ahead. We can hear you. Sorry, my microphone was off. Thank you, Madam Minister. In the first place, I want to greet all of you and thank the leadership that you and Costa Rica have in this process to obtain the good results of this forum. That is not any forum. It represents 40 years. The ministry forum is a milestone here. While I talked, the representative of the youth organizations, I was remembering the youth people who have been contributing to serve to help to resolve the terrible natural disaster or environmental disaster that we are facing. There's nothing similar that has happened in our region in the past. This has concerned all the population. It is affecting the population that, as we know, their livelihood depends on the health of ecosystems. This has seriously affected the goods and services it provides. It's a humanitarian crisis in this area, and it's an environmental disaster that is very serious. That's why I want to start by saying I want to thank for very neighbor countries have offered the cooperation in the situation, and I want to highlight the cooperation given by the United Nations system through humanitarian cooperation that has an environmental division. That is important to know about this mechanism that help us to prepare resources for a tragedy like this in a form of ministries. I remember when not regional but a global forum talking about environmental disasters in other places of the world, and they said how they prevented this. I never imagined I would be in a situation like the one they were talking about. This mechanism has the presence of experts. They are monitoring the work of technicians are performing in this task that has involved all levels, not only environmental supervision, the company who was responsible for this, but at the management. UNEP, here one of parts of this system. We want to thank, special thanks to them, and also, well, different multilateral organizations that have offered the resources, experience, and knowledge, and the government of the United States, and all the involved agencies that have experience with disasters like this, and technological resources. As in this, I'm sorry that I'm extending a little bit, something that has been very valuable from an exchange in a forum like this with the Minister Teresa Rivera from Spain. Responded very quickly to our call. I met her about 20 years about climate change, so the expertise created by the sinking of the Prestige that affected Alicia Beach, the initial response and the process has had a lot of expertise in Spain and is contributing to the response. That's what I wanted to mention, and this is a process that will take some time, and we expect that will be a reference. We hope it won't happen in any country in our region, because it's very unfortunate. There's a group of resolutions that have been presented by the ambassador. I want to congratulate you by the ambassador. Believe me, you were not boring. It shows the array of topics, and we support this to implement resolutions, the nature-based solutions, that is key. We're going to propose, among others, it's not possible to go in detail into those.
But I want to highlight the project of resolution that we have been coaching and also promoting to expand it, so that it is not only the problem of the plastic waste in the ocean, but in all those ecosystems where they are affected by the marine garbage. So that is essential. There is scientific evidence, abundant scientific evidence about this topic, and we believe that this can enable a negotiation process. Perhaps we hope this to be even better than the Minamata Agreement, which was the last global agreement that was adopted, and it took about 4 years. And because of the abundant scientific evidence, and because of the progress that has been made in that sense in the region and in the world, we believe that it is important to get there with the most collective regional force, with countries that are well expressed in the region and in this direction of starting with the negotiation process. Therefore, from Peru, we invoke the countries of the region, we urge the countries of the region to continue joining to this process. I want to highlight that while I was in the morning in one of the beaches affected, and they were ready to act the moment of the agreements, but unfortunately, because of what had to be covered over there, I couldn't comment. So I just mentioned to a journalist that was over there observing this topic that, well, we could see the remainings of tabletop plastic, and our aspiration is precisely to leave that beach in better conditions to the ones that had even been affected by the oil spill. and the problems related to the plastic waste. Of course, less than the damage that the oil spill is causing. But the scenario that I have shown, because of the different analysis, indicate that if we do not adopt the actions right now, and this is a process that, as we know, it takes time to adopt, and also the process for the implementation of that agreement, because it has its periods and mechanisms and so on. I don't have to get into the detail of what it means. It has its pace, its timing, but the nature and the level of effect that we're having because of the plastic waste, I mean, there's very clear signals that we cannot accept greater delays. So consequently, it is urgent, it is important, and I think that we can move forward with the process. So this is the point that I wanted to highlight. I would like to add that experiences like this environmental and social disaster in Peru demonstrate once again the importance of having an agreement like the Escazú Agreement. The solution to the environmental problems, as Principle 10 of the Declaration of Rio states, that Tania has mentioned with a coincidence with her birth date, it is clearly to mention that, well, the solutions can only be accomplished if each one from the role, but all together with a common vision, would tackle the environmental problems. And the Escazú Agreement is the original expression of how we have to move forward in that direction with better information, participation, and environmental justice. Peru has subscribed it, and we hope that soon the new project, a resolution that the Peruvian government is already starting to reactivate this ratification process, we could also be part of it. Experiences like what we are living clearly show that the company executing everything that is meant in the actions for the effects of the remediation, rehabilitation, and restoration, they have to be actually accompanied, and of course the volunteer actions and everything from the whole society. And Escazú reflects that process. And being Escazú, a city of Costa Rica, and being Costa Rica leader, it's a good moment to promote it. And I'm sorry that I'm extending myself, but Peru is very interested in the documentation that may be generated from this forum, the message of the chair, the rapporteur, etc. But even better, if it is a project of resolution, that we think that this would be completely viable, that we could express not just the solidarity with the Peruvian people affected by the problem caused by this spill, but also the cooperation that the countries of the region and other countries and multilateral organizations are given to Peru in this very difficult task. So I would like us to have a project of resolution. I know that this is something that has its pace and processes, but I'm sure that beyond what this means in the documents, we have the solidarity of the countries of the region, that once again, I thank them for this. So, Madam Chair, thank you. Thank you very much, Vice Minister. Thank you very much for sharing with us the vision, the topic of plastics, and this proposal. Brazil has raised its hand. Ambassador, please. It was just for you to register me in the order in the agenda. Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, first of all, and immediately I would like to say to you that my delegation would endorse a strong message of solidarity to the government and to the Peruvian people with this report that you would do personally. And you can say, I'm sure, that you have the endorsement of Brazil and also the endorsement of all the colleagues. But I don't want to speak on their behalf. Said this, Madam Chair, it is horrible to have to recognize that in Rio 92, I was amongst those that put up the wall where people wrote the messages. My white hair cannot hide that. I'll tell you several stories. My grandmother would say that the devil was dangerous because he knew more, because he was old, and not just because he was the devil. And I think it is something that's not just in Brazil, but I think that at that moment in 1992, there was a feeling of hope and shared solidarity with the international community that made that conference in Rio to have the results that it had. And to leave a solid foundation of the international cooperation in environmental matters, the principle of shared responsibilities, but differentiated a little bit in line with the idea that we all have to cooperate without any doubt. I was also in Rio Plus 20 because I had been in the previous one, so that I could also organize and participate. The environment was a little bit different, but it doesn't have to do anything. I mean, it's not that it would have been less hopeful, but the international scenario had nothing to do with the environment, although the environment is a cross-cutting element. But it changed the tone for a less encouraging, less hopeful tone, I would say, between 92 and 20 years afterwards in 2012. Or perhaps it is possible, because maybe I would have been older and I might be thinking different. In any case, Madam Chair, that reflection brings me to two comments about what I heard, and I do not want to make the ambassador feel bored, because I'm sure that she hears these comments from my good friend and her colleague in Nairobi, Serwa Albuquerque, in a more competent way than what I could do here. Brazil is very aware of the cross-cutting nature of the environmental topic, but our expectation in UNEA, that I do not know the abbreviation in Spanish, is the, United Nations Assembly. Well, I don't know the abbreviation in Spanish, so I used UNEA in English. My language is not a language that is used. We speak a lot. We're many, but we're few countries that speak that language. So we would like to avoid the contamination of the environmental agenda with other topics that are strange and that are broadly treated in the United Nations Assembly as a whole. And all the colleagues know about this. And we also want to be careful so that the decisions that are going to be adopted in UNEA 5.2 won't damage the negotiations in other international fora, or the results in other commitments in other areas that are not the environmental areas. And I think that this is a logical expectation, and it is important to admire the list of the different notifications, so you know which are the ones that we have. A little bit more of concern. We are very, very favorable, and I'm sure that Sylvia would have told you more than once, the negotiation treaty again about plastics, and we have expressed that this very clearly. We think that there are ways of fixing the differences between the two proposals of resolution in a way that is compatible with the interest of the countries in development, particularly, and without concerns. But we understand, this is a relevant concern for us, that between the terms of reference and the scope of the committee, we think that they should be previously established and not, as I believe it's still in the resolution in the last version that I read, understanding that the committee will make decisions in the first meeting. I think it would be important for UNEA to decide on those things. Finally, Madam Chair and colleagues from the table, I think that you wouldn't ignore that Brazil has serious reserves to the concept of nature-based solutions. I don't think it would be necessary to repeat here the long arguments that make us have a lot of doubts with regards to this, and doubts that are even stronger with the resolution that has been proposed for UNEA. We think that this is an idea that we do not understand the reason. I mean, it is not just that we do not ignore them. We have serious indications that the scientific bases are very fragile or non-existent, and the contribution to the mitigation of the greenhouse gases are questionable. There are lots of studies, scientific studies, that indicate that the contribution is marginally irrelevant. I am not going to extend in the many arguments that we have about this by listening to what was mentioned, the little that was mentioned about from the chair of UNEA, our colleague, and after the brief description made by the ambassador. What I would like is that the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean could keep in mind the concerns of our conception about all this. That it is not just the absolute lack of scientific basis for this type of approach, but what I think is even more serious, and this is what I would like to finish saying here, is that they actually represent an investment of the unearth. I mean, they attribute the poor countries with the cost of the solution of the mitigation for the greenhouse gases. At the end, this is what it is. I mean, it's the investment of the logic of the shared responsibilities, shared but differentiated responsibilities, and this is what we consider as particularly concerning in that approach. So, while someone does not kind of settle those concerns from Brazil, I would like to tell you very honestly that we will never be able to join something that seems to be an investment of all the logic that inspired those that signed that wall that you saw the day you were born. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador. I don't know how the level of energy is, or if you want me to share a little bit about the summary of the elements that we have here, that we have been taking note of. Jacqueline is asking me, I would say super brief, so that we can get to this element, because there are no more hands. I think it's been a long day, and tomorrow we are going to continue with the conversation, with the dialogue. So another reflection here, and thank you, Ambassador. We're not negotiating the decisions here, so not as such, but we take note, and if in the framework of what we have put on the table right now, we find that those points of agreement, because I think there are many points of agreement, more than what we believe. I think that there is a lot of points of agreement in the region about things that we can do under that vision of collaboration that I think is essential. Jacqueline? Thank you very much for the tolerance, Madam Minister. I wanted to highlight a couple of things. First, I would like to thank the panel members for their presentations, particularly Vania for the naturality with which she expressed herself, and make you all know, perhaps, that you can include the youth in your delegations. There is no restriction for that. Actually, the system allows for that in a way. Today we are having great difficulties because of the small number of people that can attend the assembly, but it is an option, and those of you that were in COP26 might have seen that a lot of delegations, even the chair in Norway and a lot of countries, they had the young delegates with them to show them, to train them. The second point that I would like to mention is a little bit what is it that we are doing today in this special session. As you know, the forum has the ordinary meetings, extraordinary meetings, but upon the request of the chair and with the acceptance of the Bureau, we decided to have this special session precisely at this moment. It is not just by chance. It is not by chance because next month, the ministers of the environment are the ones that are going to make a declaration. The ministers of the environment of the world, the ministers of the environment are the ones that are going to adopt resolutions, the ones mentioned by the ambassador, with the changes that are necessary. So maybe there are some others, may not. But it is important for the region to understand that the decision isn't you. The negotiations are obviously been made by the Ministries of Foreign Affairs because they are the ones that have the permanent representations. So this is a call to the coordination that is required to be able to establish the areas of communication. And we really thank for the initiative of Costa Rica of bringing the voice from Nairobi here. If we are able to get those connections, we are coming closer to having a coherence in the policies, a coherence in the narrative. Actually, this is not a nonsense. In previous forum, they decided to align a little bit with UNEA. And finally, I wanted to tell you also that the message that the chair of this forum can convey in UNEA is not exclusive of her. She doesn't have perhaps like the ownership on this. You can all express yourselves. She is your spokesperson. She is the person that is going to take the initiative, but your voices can be heard. There are many fields of discussion and negotiation. Not always Costa Rica is going to be present. So we need all of you in one or another way to be the ambassadors of this forum. And finally, I would like to ask you to check if you have already sent your registries to participate in UNEA. The information that we have is that there are just very few countries of the region that have done that. We are open if you need any kind of additional information or assistance to be able to facilitate your presence. Thank you very much, Madam Minister. Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you for that work of the Secretariat. I'm going to try to be very brief because honestly, we have put forth several very valuable things and we are going to continue fine-tuning things, but we are trying to identify some of those key messages that we had throughout the 3 dialogues. In that first dialogue, where we were talking precisely about the environmental conventions and those possibilities of an integrated systemic work, something more effective, several things were mentioned. This is a continent with great wealth in biological diversity, with all the representation of the different the biomass. So you put forth a series of critical points with a lot of cultural wealth, indigenous groups, and so on. And in order to face this triple planet crisis that we are experiencing, it is necessary to understand that it is also a region with a lot of inequalities, still with a lot of social challenges to face. And this puts us into this point of decision on how to make that sustainable development model material, and how we materialize it even goes through understanding that in some things we are all countries that have knowledge, that have an interesting level of sophistication, and that sometimes we need to leave back the vision of Project Titus, small little projects that are not transformational, and that really what we need is first to give and to be very clear about the great economic value that that natural wealth has, and that potential, and that we need precisely to be able to recognize that value, and in many different ways, because we're also a continent that is highly indebted, and those elements came out, they're over there going around and around, and there were many things that were put, many practical things that were also put forth, because we have this huge urgency. So how do we accelerate the action? How do we make that access to the different financial mechanisms to be effective and to be in scale? And you talked about the exchange of debt for nature, or exchange of debt for decarbonization or adaptation. So in the different countries, you can talk about some key topics. Continue structuring green bonds. They're very interesting experiences, like the Chilean experience, and then you can also share, and this could be a very interesting mechanism to continue financing a lot of these transformations that are not 100 billion but 500 billion or even more. Each one is even making analysis of how much this is going to cost. We need carbon markets with fair prices, And this is a topic that has been revolving inclusion and being very clear that this transformational change requires some work with our central banks, with our ministries of planning, with our sector ministries, and we're talking about inclusion, about environmental national accounts, talking and consolidating payment for environmental services or payment for results, even at the global level, as mechanisms that allow us to continue mobilizing that conversation with the financial sector, to also be able to establish clear signals that allow the private capital to be mobilized to this agenda. And with the social, environmental, and governance standards, we need this to be the mainstream and not something additional, but that this is a central topic. Those natural assets and those cultural assets we have, we need to transform them into that economy of the future and bioeconomy with that huge potential, with a very interesting area with that biological diversity and that dynamic of understanding the genome, that huge library that we have over there. We have to give value added to it. And we are going to need a lot of science, information, and education, more sophisticated processes, and implementing that famous phrase of knowing, preserving, and using with intelligence and sustainability many of these resources so that we can continue doing this transition in the agendas, a critical role of the research institutes, but an education that is effective, that brings us closer to all these new conditions and that nature, and where we can also make decision makers to have the science available. And there were actions, there were interesting proposals from things that are happening within the framework of some forests, what is happening in the agreement of the Antarctica, to specific proposals that we have researchers here, so that we can start making that network of researchers active again, so that we decision makers can get information. We are listening to a series of elements associated to the importance of that environmental education, and then there were critical messages that I think that we are all
Mando nota.
We're taking note of all this. It's important to start respectful dialogues between environment and different sectorial approaches. Of course, we all want this, and there are interesting things that are happening. There are technological aspects that allow us to improve our efficiency, and those options are there. Some singularities. There's a lot of technology experiences that we can start to use. Important to work in regional projects with more identity, more higher scale. The Sahel's famous project of the Great Green Wall, that at the end, when we think in Latin America, what is a flagship project? Where are we doing it? And there are many opportunities to continue searching for those projects, because looking for resources becomes crucial. Lastly, solidarity with Peruvian people, and this is something we're going to include in our summary because of this environmental tragedy. And I think it's also know that it can happen to anyone, and it's good to have clarity and cooperation mechanisms if something of this happens. I need that principle of common responsibilities was adopted in Rio. I think we are also at a critical point where we see many opportunities. The data we saw in the video sometimes they're overwhelming, but I'm quite optimistic. And what is happening now is the important technology, information, the possibility to have those systemic changes in a continent with so much talent and natural wealth. So the possibilities to move to that new geopolitics where we know of energetic efficiency is very interesting and important when we talk about the new bioeconomics with that huge natural capital. There was an analysis in Costa Rica to give value to the contribution of the natural capital to economy, and this estimate is 23% of the GDP, and so on. We will start finding options. So the possibility to talk about that development model, I think, is that we develop it, and that's interesting. We saw in the innovation of electric transportation the reserves that are in the south regarding lithium. It will have a huge potential, but we have to know how to produce it and use it so it will be beneficial for the region. This is part of the elements. I thank you that thank you for your patience. If you have something else that we are missing in the summary, you can come to me. Breakfast at 7. We are being invited by the secretariat at 8 here. And breakfast is where we had breakfast today. And there's going to be dinner here where we had lunch for those who will stay here. Thank you very much.